Hi, this is Giovanna Berry with Scrum at Scale, Scaling the Product Owner, a case study on a large nonprofit health insurance provider here in the Midwest. I had the opportunity to support this client in their Scrum scaling journey as one of 2 assigned Agile coaches. The scope included a $20 million digital product portfolio of their end user products, which was comprised of over 100 team members across 16 Scrum teams organized into 4 Scrum of Scrums. They had been successful in organically growing and scaling until they hit a series of challenges, which was highlighted by the lack of a structured product owner cycle. There were many missing elements or components here, and we were brought in to help address these gaps. Some of the problems being faced included limited visibility of roadmaps and release plans. In most cases, they either didn't exist, weren't stored centrally when they did exist, weren't kept up to date, and/or weren't driven by objective data, which was problematic. Related to this first problem, at least in part, were inaccurate delivery forecasts, which were guided by hip shot projections and were subjective at best due to inadequate release planning. Compounding these problems was an inability to proactively anticipate changing team needs. So when one team needed to scale down in size due to changing work needs in their pipeline and others needed to scale up, we weren't able to make those connections early enough to adjust and stay on track to meet the roadmap objectives. So all of these items were missing. And what resulted were missed goals in the way of organizational goals not hit within the deadlines defined, as well as features being released late. And that tied into low team morale from seeing those goals being missed and from being overworked in an effort to attempt to hit those goals, and death marches that incurred. And then lastly, we had some unhappy customers from functionality that was promised being delayed. So we knew we had to make some changes. So we crafted an experiment. We knew that in this environment, we needed to be strategic and start small to prove out our hypothesis before expanding across the portfolio. So we did this by starting with an Executive Metascrum reference model, leveraging work streams with the more seasoned product owners in Scrum. And they had established sound practices to pave the way and kind of help along the process. So we focused on one Scrum of Scrum, if you will, to establish this Executive Metascrum reference model. The portfolio already had an established organizational sprint pulse with all teams aligned to 2-week sprints. We began by implementing an Executive Metascrum event to take place every other sprint to start or monthly. And this was just for the first few months to get a sense of how that worked and hammer out some of the bumps in the process. Then we transitioned to our ideal or goal of the Executive Metascrum event taking place each sprint, so bi-weekly. As part of the effort, we also developed and maintained a release plan for the product, which was not something that was being done consistently or well before. So we formulated the hypothesis, which was if we implement an Executive Metascrum reference model, then we will forecast timelines of those related features with 80% accuracy. And this was over a 6-month period, which spanned 12 sprints. So from there, we did run into some challenges as we put our experiment into place. It wouldn't be a real-world experiment if we didn't have those challenges. For one, as is typical in making changes, there was a resistance to adapt and increase transparency via planning. It makes some people nervous. They don't understand, the purpose or how this applies to them, if it's serving to help them, etc. And a lot of that was also in getting the team members to buy into participation in the Executive Metascrum and engage as well. It was a cultural shift with not only how we did things, bringing in the structure with the Executive Metascrum and the related event, but also ensuring that clear, transparent communication was beneficial to the related teams and for stakeholders and customers. These were very real challenges, and we had to navigate and overcome them nonetheless. So as we moved through our experiment, we tracked our key results. Upon kicking off the experiment, we identified the team members that would be part of the Executive Metascrum, their roles and responsibilities to establish that foundation. In the first month, we held our first monthly Executive Metascrum event. In the second month, we held our second Executive Metascrum event, as well as added the development of a transparent release plans with clear dependencies identified. It was stored in a centralized location to serve as a reference and example for others that were not part of this experiment. In the third month, we shifted to a biweekly Executive Metascrum, which was our goal, and we also began reporting on the level of schedule forecast accuracy. So we did that by leveraging not only the actuals for when features were released, but also using the committed dates. These were dates that the features were committed to be released by based on the stakeholder agreements and organizational goals. In tracking the actuals and committed dates, we could calculate the forecasting accuracy, how many features were delivered by the date committed. And we started with a forecasting accuracy for this group of 65 to 70%, which wasn't horrible, but we knew that there was room to improve. Now this group, keep in mind, as I mentioned previously, was more seasoned, so while they didn't have elements like the best release plans in place, they did have sound product owner practices, which enabled their teams to deliver more reliably than the other teams in their portfolio. But we knew we couldn't stop there. So we continued on, and by the end of the 6th month, we had consistently achieved an 80 to 85% forecasting accuracy, which gave me and my colleagues working through this experiment a level of confidence that we could sustain this performance. We were also tracking the forecasting accuracy of the teams not included in this reference model as a sort of control to kind of compare, and they were ranging anywhere from 30 to 60% forecasting accuracy rates to further illustrate the validity of our hypothesis. So they had that sort of metric from 30 to 60% in forecasting accuracy from the beginning through the end of from when we began tracking that metric to the end of the experiment, and we didn't see much fluctuation or improvement there. Another metric that indicated a relationship with the improved forecasting accuracy or potential relationship was the customer satisfaction score, or CSAT. Now, this was something that the organization was tracking and reporting long before the experiment and continued on long after. And it was being used to gauge the overall level of customer satisfaction with the associated product per release. After reviewing the data that we found for the CSAT score, we saw that there was consistently a 10% higher rate from the last 2 months of the experiment, so months 5 and 6, than it had been over the previous 12 months. So there was a very clear and marked uptick during this period of time as our experiment and the practices matured. So we found that very interesting and wanted to notate that. And as our experiment drew to a close, we worked to take into account our key learnings and then expand from there. So as we reflected on our experiment, the key results and challenges, we were able to pull out 3 common themes in our key learnings. As far as resistance to change, we heavily leveraged change agents and champions for Scrum at Scale within the organization to help with buy-in of the participants of that Executive Metascrum reference model, and then their colleagues beyond and across the portfolio. So we leaned on those individuals that were served as change agents to help us evangelize and get more buy-in. We found that this method was much more effective at expanding buy-in than using myself and the other consultants working through this effort, and only us evangelizing alone. As we know, those that are in the trenches with you are often, their opinions and words bear more weight than, say, a consultant that may not have had as much history with that group. So as far as participation and engagement in the Executive Metascrum event is concerned, we found that increasing team autonomy on how the process worked within the confines of the framework significantly improved their willingness to engage. When we started things off, we were pretty prescriptive as far as how the event and the inner workings would function, and the team had different ideas. And there is flexibility within the framework, as we know. So when we took a step back and let them, those involved, take the reins a bit within the confines of the framework, like I mentioned, to define some of those nuances, they were much more engaged and willing to participate. So also tying into our learnings that team autonomy, the process improves participation, is the concept that self-organizing teams are more engaged and successful. Now, this is something we know as Scrum and Scrum at Scale practitioners, but it was just very interesting to come full circle and reinforcing that as a key learning coming out of this exercise and experiment. So as we took a step back, gave them more autonomy, encouraged self-organization, we saw that their performance increased and improved significantly, and in the end, where they were more successful. So that brings us to what our next steps were. So with our newfound success, we took some next steps to expand this reference model. We weren't stopping there. We were using it to, again, set an example and increase buy-in, and then be able to prove out our hypothesis to help us with a successful broad implementation across the portfolio. We leveraged the success of this reference model to increase that buy-in, like I mentioned, and then slowly looped in additional teams and Scrum of Scrums until it encompassed all the relevant groups for the product owner cycle missing component implementation. And then we expanded the metrics to gauge and monitor ongoing performance for these groups. And that helped us kind of monitor, see where we needed to make adjustments to continue to mature in the implementation. So this brings us to a close here. And I want to close with this quote from Steve Jobs, as it does a great job of driving home one of our key learnings. And it reads, "It doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do." So while we are Scrum at Scale SMEs and consultants, and we're knowledgeable in the framework and change management and all of these wonderful elements and practices, we can't discount the insights and capabilities of the team members that are already in place doing the work today. So they have been functioning, maybe not optimally, but getting the work done. And they are our greatest assets when it comes to navigating their home landscape. They know it in and out, and they know the landmines and where the more helpful pathways are, and guiding them via clear outlined objectives and parameters and kind of guidelines often offers them enough to encourage autonomy to define those specifics and nuances. So that was our kind of big takeaway in closing here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've gotten something out of this case study, as I know my colleagues and I have, and just thank you so much. Take care.